Now, first of all, by way of background, just so that we can have an idea of remind ourselves of what the mandate of the Institute is and the kind of changes that are being brought in by the law, and analyze those changes from the perspective of the mandate of the Institute. So essentially, the Institute has gone through quite a bit of transformation since its inception in 1964. It was converted into a company limited by guarantee in 2009, and its mandate has been education, training, and professional development for the sector. And it's important to just bear that in mind, as we assess whether the changes in the law are either good or bad for the Institute. Obviously, since the regulator is here, everything is good. But we'll proceed. So essentially, that is really it. And the Institute was recognized in the previous act, the act that we're currently utilizing until the new act formally commences. But it was recognized essentially as the entity that will receive the training levy and administer it. This is what the governance structure of the Institute looks like as of now. You've got the annual general meeting, which is really the body that comprises the members with their various categories of involvement in the sector, insurers, brokers, etc., etc. The governing council, which is elected by the members and performs the duties of a board. The board of trustees, which was designed, and I think it was quite a novel innovation by the Institute, to just have an entity that would give a part of the governance structure that would give an independent oversight of the management of the levy, because the levy essentially is constitutes public funds. When a levy is, using the word levy is another word for tax, essentially. So if you're going to get money from the public for a particular purpose, then it's only appropriate to have an independent entity that is going to oversee it. So it was quite a bright innovation. And then finally the Secretariat, which essentially is the management of the Institute. Now, on just doing a review, and really from a legal perspective, some of the challenges, there are some challenges with the current structure of the Institute. Just purely from a legal and governance perspective. First and foremost, it's normally unusual to have a situation where a public levy is effected, and the money from that public levy goes into a purely private entity for its operations. And I think that's why many of us, or should I say many of you, were up in arms when there was a suggestion a couple of months back that money should go into the hands of companies that are defaulting in the financial sector. That really is the concept. Normally, public levy or a tax goes into the administration of a public entity, which will hold it and manage it in trust for the public. So the fact that the Institute currently is purely a member-owned entity can place it in a precarious position. We've got very radical members of parliament who are always looking for new business to effect in parliament, and this would be a very easy prey for them. Essentially, good public finance would require otherwise. There are also questions as to whether the current membership of the Institute truly reflects the level of investment and input by the various categories of players in the sector. Now, the membership essentially votes for the election of the governing council and the various initiatives that are undertaken, and there needs to be a lot of thought. Normally, a company, if you just go to a purely private company, voting of that nature takes place and is based purely on the stake that you have in the sector. Now, the big questions as to whether the current membership structure allows for that. So that's one of the issues. And the last is really kind of aligned to the very first, which is how do you properly account for public funds which are being utilized in a private environment? And now we've got, quite a bit of accountability coming from the PFMA, the Public Finance Management Act. So the fact that, as I said, public funds are being collected, being utilized in private hands and not being accounted for in a manner that is provided for by other statutes in Uganda that relate to public funds can be a bit of an issue. With that background, I think we'll go into the changes that the new law brings in place. First of all, as we already know, the law recognized the institute, recognized it as the recipient, the beneficiary of the levy, and recognized that every insurer would be a member of the institute. Currently, the new law does not provide, is silent on membership. What it does, however, provide is that there shall be a conversion of the current institute into a college. The Act brings the college, or the appropriate word would be the Act creates a framework for the existence of the college in a very interesting way. Normally, an entity of this nature will come into effect either by the creation of constitutional documents, again by an act of parliament. That is normally how it occurs. So one act will refer to it, the other act will actually create its constitutional documents, its what its board will look like, what its functions are, etc., etc. That's normally the way it's done. Another way is an act can refer or create the necessity for a body to come into play and allow that body to be created under other laws, and in this case it would be the Companies Act. And that is, the latter is what this law does. It provides for the establishment of a college, but it doesn't go ahead and require that another act be put in place for its constitution. Neither does it anticipate that. It instead recognizes that the institute exists, whose mandate, which we've already referred to, is aligned to the kind of mandates that the college should be operating under, and therefore provides for this transformation. So it's an interesting way it's being done, but it comes with certain implications. What is effectively a private entity is now going to become a public entity. It's going to, as we'll look further, there are issues on how it's going to be managed, and effectively it's going to be overseen by the minister. So it's, for all intents and purposes, a public entity. And what it should get us to consider is, how does this impact to our rights as stakeholders, original stakeholders, who have contributed to the formation of this entity, who have contributed funds to this entity, which funds have become assets of the entity. So that's something that needs to be thought through. And then secondly, so how do you address that fact, that transformation, and the fact that the assets which were previously privately owned are going into public hands? And secondly, how do you address the issue of stakeholder involvement in future? Yes, it is now going to be a public entity, and it's going to be effectively overseen by a minister, but it's still an entity that operates in the interest of and for the benefit of the sector. And the sector is made up of its players, the insurers, the brokers, the agents, etc., etc. So how do you ensure that this entity, though converted, will still act in the interest of these people, that these stakeholders will have a real say in how the entity is managed? And having a real say begins first and foremost with ensuring, helping determine who controls the entity. Now, the next item, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, I'll go through the presentation, then we'll have questions. So the next issue, which I had alluded to earlier, is the appointment of the board. So the conversion occurs from a private entity to a public entity, and the act is clear on how it's going to be controlled. The control of any entity is through its board. Any company is really through its board. So the minister will be the one to appoint the board of the new entity, of the college. This was not the case previously. Now, we've got to ask ourselves first and foremost, actually, we shouldn't even ask ourselves, we should acknowledge that this has an impact on the current governance structure of the institute. As it is now, the Governing Council really does already perform the duties of the board. The Board of Trustees also perform certain special duties of the board. So if you look at the two entities in light of this new act, it essentially means that, you know, both of them would have to, in one way or another, you know, constitute themselves into a board of sorts. So there can't be a board of trustees in future. There's got to be an arrangement where the function that is undertaken by the board of trustees is now undertaken by the board. And there's got to obviously be an arrangement to ensure that the kind of profile of persons who were in the board of trustees, who give credibility to management of these funds, are also in the board. But you see, when we're talking about the board effectively means control of the entity. Now, although the Act provides that the minister will appoint, the Act doesn't go through all the details as to how the appointees will be chosen. So what this does is it gives an opportunity for the current members, for you, the stakeholders, to be able to participate in one way or another in the appointment, or at least in crafting of the manner in which the various appointees are going to be chosen. And what the Act does provide is that this is done upon recommendation of the regulator. So, you know, all of this will be under the coordination of the regulating entity. There is need to give more thought into how the governing structure will operate going forward. The membership of an entity normally are the final decision makers. They will normally determine, you know, hold the board accountable, and ensure that the views of themselves as stakeholders are ultimately being taken into account by the board. Now, given the fact that this is now going to be a public entity, then again, we may have to think carefully about what is going to be the role of the current membership. You know, are you going to have AGMs and you know, come together to make decisions? But what kind of decisions will you be making? You know, so more thought has got to be had in that direction. You know, clearly the minister will have a much greater hand on a lot of the activities of the institute. But I think that given that the regulator is looking at working with the stakeholders to ensure that the statutory instrument that forms the regulations of this institute are put in place, then there must be an opportunity for the stakeholders to find a role for themselves as a special category of members in the institute. The next issue also to consider is the appointment of the executive, the secretariat. I mean, that's not even alluded to under the current act. But ordinarily, what happens is that, and you know, this has got to be considered to be the case here. What happens is that once an act provides for the appointment of a board by a minister and doesn't give the minister further discretions, the assumption is that the board will then have the right to determine the manner in which management shall be appointed. So the statutory instruments will go into the details of how the board will exercise this power. But obviously, given that the institute is now going to be a college, there's going to be thought as to whether the current management structure is appropriate for the college. Is there a need for new roles to be put in place? Is there a need for something to be done during an interim period? So those are a couple of things that will have to be decided upon by the members and should find their way into the statutory instrument. One of the benefits, probably, of the conversion of the institute from a private member-owned entity into a public entity is the fact that it allows for the institute, or rather now the college, to be able to, over and above the levy, get additional support from the government, or at least under the auspices of the government. So there is a certain opportunity there, and I would not like, I mean, normally Ugandans are berated for always asking for more money, but what this provides is an opportunity to make your case known in the event that there is need for support in obtainment of further funding under auspices of government. So that is one benefit that comes in, that we see coming with the conversion. I think this we have effectively already talked about, and this really with regard to the Board of Trustees, the role of the Board of Trustees, which now gets merged into the board itself. So more thought has to be had in that respect. One issue that that also requires consideration is the manner in which certification should be done. What effectively the Act does is it makes this new college become the default training and certifying body. The reality now is that there may be need for further capacity building. Currently, the institute is providing a lot of training, but its mandate is being expanded with respect to training. When an entity of this nature is made the default, it essentially